All right, here we go. I've got my red threaded Regency Stays project to work on while I watch every single version of Pride and Prejudice that you can currently find still intact. This is gonna take a while. I just have a feeling.
Hello all and welcome. My name is Margaret. I'm a historical costumer and textile conservator in training, and today I will be ranking 21 versions of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I have spent the last month watching these adaptations, taking notes, and deciding which I think are the best and which ones I think you should avoid. We'll go into the selection process for these films and the criteria a little bit later, but first I just wanted to give you an introduction about Pride and Prejudice in general. Pride and Prejudice is, of course, a novel by Jane Austen. It was published in 1813, but she started writing it in 1795. It is, of course, a very well-loved classic novel that follows the story of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy falling in love. It has been put to the screen many, many times, as we will see, some of which are good and some of which are not so great. So next, I just wanted to talk through sort of the selection process for these movies, because there are some in here that you might be a little confused why they're on this list, but I will explain. So this was sort of the ground rules for the media selection. Number 1, they had to be in English. There are a lot of great foreign adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. I just unfortunately had to cap it somewhere, and it ended up being English language adaptations. Partially this is for me. I like to sew while I watch these movies. I actually sewed this corset, this beautiful red threaded long line Regency Stays while watching these films, and so reading subtitles is just not something that was going to happen. Additionally, I am in the United States, and it is easiest for me to find English language versions because I'm on United States streaming services. I did find a K-drama that's called Pride and Prejudice, although I'm not sure if it's an adaptation of Jane Austen's work. Number 2, no single episodes of TV shows. Partially because this was going to be really hard to research, really hard to find, and also we'd be here forever. Number 3, no sequels. The exception to this is Death Comes to Pemberley, because that's technically a sequel of Pride and Prejudice. However, there's one sequel to a Hallmark movie and then the sequels to Bridget Jones, which I just didn't think made sense within the context of this video. And number 4, no theatrical productions that are just on YouTube. There's one theatrical production in this list, but it is on a streaming service and it was professionally filmed. But let's get into what we are actually reviewing today. So I've broken up these films into 4 different categories. There are a couple of Pride and Prejudice adaptations that no longer exist, and I just wanted to run through those really quickly. Those include adaptations from 1938, 1949, 1952, and 1958. Obviously, these don't exist anymore, so I didn't review them, but they are worth noting that there were quite a few Pride and Prejudice adaptations between the 1940s movie and then the 1980s television production. So in terms of movies that we're actually reviewing, because they exist, the first category is the straight from literary adaptions. These are the versions of Pride and Prejudice that are obviously set in the Regency era, those being the 1940s version, the 1967 version, which you will see has an asterisk because only 2 episodes of that series actually survive, so we will be reviewing that, but just note that it is not the full series. The 1980s version, which is BBC television, the 1995 version, iconic, and the 2005 version. I also put in this category Pride and Prejudice, a new musical, which is streaming on Amazon, and that is from 2020. Then there are the modern day adaptions. We have Bridget Jones' Diary, which is loosely based on Pride and Prejudice from 2001, Pride and Prejudice, a latter-day comedy from 2003, Bride and Prejudice from 2004, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which was an interactive web series that ran from 2012 to 2013, Unleashing Mr. Darcy from 2016, Before the Fall 2017, Christmas at Pemberley Manor 2018, Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe 2018. Not sure why we needed 2 Christmas Pride and Prejudice movies in 2018, but we have them. Pride and Prejudice Atlanta in 2019, and Pride, Prejudice Cut, also called Becoming Mrs. Bennet, Pride and Prejudice 2019. Then we have what I call the flipped period adaptions, which are adaptations that exist in the Regency era but have some sort of augmentation to them. So that's Lost in Austen from 2008 and Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies from 2013. And then we have the category that I'm calling Pride and Prejudice adjacent film and media. These include Death Come to Pemberley, Pride and Prejudice Having a Ball, and Austen Land. So these are films that either deal with the subject matter or characters of Pride and Prejudice, but aren't necessarily adaptations of the original novel. One more thing we need to talk about, and that's the ground rules for how I will be ranking these films. Obviously, this is very subjective. If you have a different take on this, if you love some movies I hated, if you hate some movies I love, I would love for you to comment down below and start chatting about it. I love to hear everyone's different opinions on these forms of media, and I would love to hear yours. So please don't take it in any personal way. I'm totally fine if you have a different opinion on this. But you're here to watch my opinion, so hello! But I just wanted to give you a little insight about how I rank these movies, because I tried to be slightly objective. So first off, I do take into account the overall quality of the movie. This includes production value, acting, costumes, music, editing, etc. Whether or not it's an actually good film, which of course is still slightly subjective, but is a bit more of an objective measure. Number 2 is how much I liked the movie personally, how much I enjoyed watching it, and number 3 is if I would watch the movie again. Those two kind of go together. Number 4 is reverence to the source material. I'm not super concerned about them going plot point by plot point or, hitting the characterization bang on the head. What I'm really concerned about is if the makers of the film actually enjoyed the source material and it's evident that they took care with the source material in their work. And of course, overall iconicness. Honestly, this is a very obtuse sort of parameter to set, but I think that cultural cachet is important when talking about these adaptations because, let's be real, there are 2 on here that everybody would like to know my opinions about, and I think that that should weigh heavily on their overall ranking because frankly, if a lot of people like them, there's something to that. So, I will let you go over to future Maggie. Alright, hello everyone. So I just wanted to run through sort of the categories before we started with this particular part of the video. So first up here we have our S tier at 1,000 a year. These are movies that are completely iconic and are definitely required viewing for anybody who loves Pride and Prejudice. And then we have Fine Eyes, our A tier. These are movies that I particularly enjoyed watching, would watch again, and definitely think you should watch too. Then we have A Parsonage of No Mean Size. These are movies that I thought were enjoyable, probably don't necessarily need to watch them again, but would recommend to anybody who found them interesting. Then we have the category Tolerable, I Suppose. These are movies that I did not particularly enjoy watching, but I think still have quite a bit of merit to them. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to people, but if they sound interesting, I wouldn't dissuade you from watching them either. And then of course we have Are the Shades of Pemberley to be Thus Polluted. These are movies that I very much did not enjoy watching, that I think are certifiably bad films, and I would not recommend to you. In fact, I would dissuade you from watching them. So those are our categories today, and we have down here our 21 film, television, and other sorts of media that we will be discussing. So let's just start right in. First off, we have Pride and Prejudice. This is a Bollywood rendition of the classic Jane Austen tale, and this one is going into A Parsonage of No Mean Size. So here's the scoop on this movie. I liked this movie. It has a lot of life. It has a lot of color. Obviously, it's Bollywood. There are beautiful dancing and singing numbers that I think add a lot to the story and really bring a new, fresh take to Pride and Prejudice. It was made in 2004, so it has that Y2K feel. However, I think it can be a little cheesy at times, a little bit cringy at times, and all in all just wasn't like the best film ever made, which is totally fine. It also has one of my least favorite Pride and Prejudice tropes, which is the double wedding. I don't like the double wedding trend. I'm probably alone on this island of not liking the double wedding, and I'm probably going to get some comments that are like, I love the double wedding, and that's fine. I don't like it. I think it's cheesy. All right, next up we have Lost in Austen. This is a story of a woman who goes back into the Regency era, into the Jane Austen novel, and proceeds to sort of muck things up. This is also going into A Parsonage of No Mean Size, and here's the reason for that. I liked it. I thought it was very innovative. I thought it was very interesting. But it just, I don't know, it just didn't quite capture me, and that's honestly a me thing. This is like a me feeling. It had the oeuvre of like David Tennant era Doctor Who, because it's that same era of like English television, that late aughts English television. I think it was made in 2008. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, because it certainly does flip Jane Austen's story onto its head. If you're a purist and you really love Pride and Prejudice, this might not be the series for you, because it definitely subverts Jane Austen in as many ways as it possibly can. Let's talk about Pride and Prejudice having a ball. So this is a film, I believe it's like a TV documentary, where our presenters and a cast of very talented people recreate the Meryton Ball from Pride and Prejudice using period techniques in both the food and the dancing and the lighting and the costumes. This one is going into fine eyes. And here's why. Although this doesn't necessarily fit into this ranking, very much involves Pride and Prejudice. This evokes Pride and Prejudice. I think this is a really good palate cleanser if you are doing this gauntlet like I did. This one really takes you out of the fictional story of Pride and Prejudice and centers it and grounds it in the historical Regency era in a very material culture sort of way. And as a person who works in material culture, I am a textile conservator in grad school at the moment. That was very refreshing. I really, really liked that. And I think that if you love Pride and Prejudice, this is a great watch. Again, it's not in 10,000 a year because it's not an iconic piece of media that everyone needs to see, but I definitely enjoyed it a lot, and I would definitely watch it again in the future when I forget the information that was presented to me. Next we have Bridget Jones' Diaries. This is, of course, a 90s romantic comedy starring Renee Zellweger, Hugh Grant, and Colin Firth, very, very popular celebrities in the 90s. And it tells the story of a woman in her early 30s looking for love. It is going into a parsonage of no mean size. I really oscillate between these two categories with this movie because it is an iconic film. It was a very, very well-liked film in the 90s. Obviously, my mom really likes this film. And it is a classic 90s rom-com. It's up there with Four Weddings and a Funeral and Notting Hill, although I do like Notting Hill quite a bit better. But the reason I'm putting it into a parsonage of no mean size, and the reason I oscillate between the two, is because looking at it from 2021 eyes, there are some aspects of this movie that are slightly problematic, from the particular treatment of a Japanese character who is not shown on screen, she's just talked about, which with all the recent talk about the Stop AAPI hate movement that has been going around, that particular few lines about the Asian character left a bad taste in my mouth, and then also Hugh Grant's just atrocious behavior in the workplace, which obviously is his character. This movie definitely centers on having a Darcy character and a Wickham character, and that's sort of its only Pride and Prejudice contribution. This is a very loosely based Pride and Prejudice. For those reasons, it's not up there, but I do enjoy this movie. I think it's funny. I think its Raining Men scene is great. That scene is fabulous, frankly. I will say this movie is very, very loosely based on Pride and Prejudice, and there are a couple more movies on this list that I say are bad because they use very few tropes of Pride and Prejudice, but then they take on the Pride and Prejudice name while not really giving you Pride and Prejudice. This one doesn't really give you Pride and Prejudice, but it also doesn't take on the Pride and Prejudice name. This is Bridget Jones' Diary. This is not Bridget Jones' Diary retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but it is on this list because it has aspects of Pride and Prejudice and it is loosely based off of Pride and Prejudice. I have mixed feelings on this one. And I probably will change my mind on this one later, so who knows. Speaking of movies that aren't Pride and Prejudice but say they're Pride and Prejudice, let's talk about the Hallmark films. We have Unleashing Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Meet at a Dog Show. We have two movies about Christmas that were both released in 2018. We have Christmas at Pemberley Manor and where is it? Oh, Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe. No. That's what I have for this. No. These movies are bad. These movies are horrible. And that's where they're going into the shades. Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted? And here's why. Here's why. All of these movies, without fail, use the iconography and names and loosely base their characters off of Pride and Prejudice characters while giving us none of Pride and Prejudice. So they're using the Jane Austen's work essentially as a marketing tool, and that's it. Like, Hallmark movies are bad. I think we can all agree that Hallmark movies are not classically good films, and if you like Hallmark movies, more power to you. That is not why I do not like these films. I mean, it's partially why I don't like these films. I don't like Hallmark movies. But that's not why they're so low on this list. The reason they're so low on this list is because they take parts of the names of these characters. They take parts of the story. The only parts of the story they take is like, sometimes they'll do the Jane Bingley thing, like a little bit, like maybe. And then they'll also have Mr. Darcy is like rich and kind of haughty, and Elizabeth is a free-spirited lady, and they don't like each other, but they end up liking each other. Like, girl, that's every romantic comedy. Like, tell me a romantic comedy where that is not the base plot of it, okay? I bet you can think of one, but besides the point. These movies take that aspect of Pride and Prejudice, and that's the only real aspect of Pride and Prejudice they have. They might throw scraps at us of something else. They might name a character Catherine and make her kind of a bitch to be like Lady Catherine de Bourgh. You know, they might have the Jane Bingley thing. But in all intents and purposes, these movies are not Pride and Prejudice and should not be using that name to sell me it. If you catch my drift. And that's why I'm mad at these movies. They're also bad films. They're also really boring and have no dramatic tension and have really contrived plots, and I don't like them. They make me a little bit angry. Can you tell they make me a little bit angry? Now, if you feel that you need to watch one of these movies, I would say Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe is the way to go. It's definitely the best ones. The main characters had the most chemistry in this one. The plot was the least annoying. I don't know, it was fine. It was the best one of the bunch. Christmas at Pemberley Manor was the worst one of the bunch because it had zero dramatic tension. Zero goose egg dramatic tension. Literally did not want to make you uncomfortable at any turn. Really, really not good. Next we have Pride and Prejudice, a latter-day comedy. This is a Mormon film. Interestingly enough, I thought I was gonna hate this one, but I didn't. It goes in a parsonage of no mean size, and here is why. This film is a lot of fun. And this film, unlike the Hallmark movies we just talked about, has obvious reverence for the source material. The little Easter eggs that they put in there are just so much fun. Pretty much follows the plot of Pride and Prejudice. However, instead of them being a family, they are in fact roommates. So I think some of the familial relationship aspect of Pride and Prejudice, which is honestly some of the funnest parts, is missing, right? Of all of them, you think the Mormon one would have the familial aspect. But no, that's a part I didn't like about it. And the plot can be contrived at points, and it needed a few more rewrites. It needed a little bit more time in the oven before it was birthed into the world. But all in all, it's a lot of fun. It's very colorful. It's very spunky. It's funky. It's very like Y2K nostalgia. If you are into that, this is a great film. Even if you don't like Pride and Prejudice, the Y2K nostalgia factor is like off the charts. I mean, it's essentially trying to be Clueless. Clueless is a better film, but I think it works. It's funny. I laughed in this movie. It was weird and wacky and wild, and you know what? They went for it. They did the full Fitzwilliam. They named him Fitzwilliam Darcy. And I'm like, you go. No one else has the balls to do that, frankly. For that, I'm definitely putting it into a parsonage of no mean size. I liked this movie a lot. And I think that I would recommend it if you like Y2K nostalgia and you like kind of weird, wacky movies. Should also say quickly, Pride and Prejudice, a latter-day comedy, does have one of my least favorite tropes of these movies in it, and that is what I like to call 11th hour Charlotte Lucas, where the character of Charlotte Lucas shows up and we're like, who is this? And then Lizzie Bennet's like, this is my best friend Charlotte, and then she leaves. She evaporates. Alright, let's get into Pride and Prejudice 1940. This is our first straight adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, and it is going into the Fine Eyes category. This movie's a lot of fun! This movie's a lot of fun. What takes it out of the top spot is that it's not quite Pride and Prejudice. It's decidedly set in the 1830s from the costumes, and it doesn't quite give you Pride and Prejudice. It gets there, it has all the sort of the plot points, you know, the familial relationship is there, it's very cute, but it doesn't quite get there in terms of the plot. I don't know. Lady Catherine turns out to be good at the end. The ending is very confusing to me. The ending is just like, we don't care what Jane Austen wrote. Like, we're doing our own, like, happy ending. I saw this written somewhere, and I think it's very true, that this movie is more of a Victorian comedy than it is a Regency romance. On the note of the costumes, because I do see a lot of people sort of ragging on the costumes of this movie, I loved them. I loved these costumes. They were designed by Adrian, and if you are not familiar with classic Hollywood films of the 30s and 40s, you might not know that Adrian is like the costume designer of that era. Their costumes are collected by major institutions for their fashion element. Like, they were designing like fashion pieces, not just costumes, like high fashion. So these costumes are high fashion, they're gorgeous. I want Caroline's dress from the Netherfield Ball. Oh my god, the sequins on that thing. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. I also really like Greer Garrison as Lizzie Bennet. I think she does a wonderful job. She's spunky, she's sarcastic, she's really fun in the role, and so I really enjoyed that about it. Overall, I really like this movie, and I highly recommend it if you love Hollywood, classic Hollywood films. This is great. Alright, let's talk about Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. This one is also going into Fine Eyes. This is a retelling of Jane Austen's classic work with the added layer of a zombie apocalypse over top of it. It's very fun. I really like this movie. I really like the warrior princess trope, like that badass girl trope, and this movie has that in droves, and that's my trash. Like, if you give me like a badass like warrior princess who also gets to wear pretty dresses but gets to like do awesome sword fights and gets to like pull a dagger out of the sheath of her a thigh sheath thingy, I will find the technical term for that one day. I'm there, okay? So I'm here for this movie. Granted, it's not going to be for everyone. My mother, who is my Pride and Prejudice buddy in this world, hates this film because she does not like gore. This movie does have gore in it, so if you don't like gore, don't watch it. I loved it, and I probably will watch it again, and I'm really excited for the sequel. The only thing, technically speaking, about this movie that doesn't work for me is it is fast. This movie keeps it going. It does not give you time to breathe. And I understand. You have to tell the entirety of Pride and Prejudice, which they have done 6-hour-long miniseries of, while also giving me an alternative history of England with a zombie apocalypse on top of it. Like, that's a lot to do in a one film. I understand that. But it also has a double header of the tropes I don't like for Pride and Prejudice. It has the double wedding, which we discussed I don't particularly like. Although I'm less mad about it in this movie because I kind of get it. It's like you're in a zombie apocalypse. Like, one wedding is enough to plan. Frankly, you've got other shit to do. And then the second is that it has 11th hour Charlotte Lucas. It has the worst case of 11th hour Charlotte Lucas. We literally do not meet Charlotte Lucas until she shows up to marry Mr. Collins. And then Elizabeth's like, Charlotte, my best friend. And we're like, where has she been? And my thing with 11th hour Charlotte Lucas is it's fine because I know the plot of Pride and Prejudice. But if you didn't know the plot of Pride and Prejudice, that would be really confusing. Again, would highly recommend it if you can do the zombie thing. All right, Pride and Prejudice, 1967. So, as we discussed previously, this version of Pride and Prejudice is not complete. This is a 1960s television series, and most of the episodes have been lost. There's only 2 episodes. You can find them on YouTube if you're interested. This goes into tolerable, I suppose, because frankly, it's 60s television. It's not particularly well produced. It's just okay. It's just okay, and that's what I'm gonna say about it. If you are a completist, if you feel like you need to watch all these films and do this gauntlet with me, like, it's fine. It'll take you less than an hour of your life, but it's incomplete and also just not particularly. Lizzie Bennet Diaries. Let's talk about it. Lizzie Bennet Diaries is going into a parsonage of no mean size. Full transparency, I did not rewatch the entire series for this review specifically, although I did watch it while it was coming out. And the reason it's going into Parsonage of No Mean Size is because I feel that although it's very innovative, although it is very good, I did really enjoy this, it was much better when it was coming out weekly and you were watching it than on playback. On playback, I feel like it can get kind of samey, it can get kind of stale because you are kind of in that static vlogging format. You're on YouTube, you know what that feels like. That can be a lot for, I think the runtime's like 300 minutes. If you're interested in the vlogging format and you've never seen it, I think it is worth a watch, but I don't think it's going to be for everybody, and I also think that like some of the fun of the series gets lost in the playback. Good, innovative, honestly fabulous, but not necessarily something that I think that everyone needs to see. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this one. All right, let's talk Austen land. So this is the story of a woman who's obsessed with Jane Austen, and she ends up going to like this Jane Austen camp for adults, and weird and wacky stuff happens. So it's not really a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but I am going to put it in a Parsonage of No Mean Size. It's a fun movie. I think this movie is really fun. I think that if you like Jane Austen, if you like Pride and Prejudice, you are going to get a couple laughs out of this film. But it's also not for everyone. My mother does not like this film, which I will keep saying when my mother doesn't like something. It's good. It's good. I like it. It can be kind of cheesy, kind of cringy at points, but I enjoyed it. That's why it's going into a Parsonage of No Mean Size. Let's talk about Pride, Prejudice, and Cut, also known as Becoming Ms. Bennet, Pride and Prejudice. So this film is what the Hallmark films should have been. So it's going into tolerable, I suppose. It's not the best made film. It's obviously kind of a low budget movie. The plot can be kind of contrived at points, but it's a Hallmark quality movie, I would say. But instead of the Hallmark films, which we talked about previously, this film actually tries to be Pride and Prejudice. It's a story of an actress who gets a part playing Lizzie Bennet, and she goes to set, and the people who are playing their characters are sort of analogous to those characters, and they do use quite a few of the plot points in Pride and Prejudice to actually tell the story in a cohesive manner, and it makes sense, and I'll be honest with you, it wasn't a complete bore. It was kind of interesting. It wasn't good. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but I think that if you like Hallmark-style movies, and you like Pride and Prejudice, watch this movie over the actual Hallmark ones. This movie is much better. Alright, now let's talk about Before the Fall. It's going in this one. It's going into the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted. And here's what I have to say about Before the Fall. This is an LGBT retelling of the classic novel. And I just want to say that I think an LGBTQIA+ queer retelling of Pride and Prejudice could be so good. I think that could be a great way to modernize the story. I think that there's a lot there in terms of, familial relationships and sort of this will they, won't they of like, do we know if the Darcy character is also gay? Do we know this? Like, I think that could be really fun and really cute and really interesting. This is not that movie. This movie is obviously a lower budget film, which I'm not gonna knock them for, but the color palette is gray and the story is very depressing and there's a lot of legalese, and the way you make me go to sleep is to give me legalese. Like, not my thing. But it doesn't capture that core, that soul of Pride and Prejudice. It just doesn't get there. And I think that the reason for that is because it doesn't quite dive into the story. So it has elements of Pride and Prejudice, but they're kind of clunkily fit into this other storyline that they're trying to tell. And to be honest, I think this would have been a much better film if they just dropped that pretense altogether and they were just like, you know what? We're going to make a story about a guy who's down on his luck who falls in love with a lawyer. You know what? That makes sense to me. Kind of wedging Pride and Prejudice in there makes this a worse film. It just does to me. And I don't know, it was just, the movie was gray in tone and it was gray in color. And overall, really disliked this film, actively disliked this film, and, you know, I think that a queer Pride and Prejudice could be awesome. It could be so good. This is just not it. This is not it. And I honestly think that a studio or somebody needs to make a good queer Pride and Prejudice, because I'm going to be there for that. I'm just not here for this particular film. It's going into the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted, not because it's an LGBT retelling of the story, but because it's a bad film. I just want to make that very clear. Want to make that very, very clear. Let's talk about Pride and Prejudice, a new musical. This is our only musical on the list, because it is the only one that was on a streaming service and it was professionally filmed, and I'm putting it into tolerable, I suppose, and I feel bad about that. It could go into a parsonage of no mean size, but it was okay. It was okay. I don't remember, well, because I don't remember any of them. I can't tell you a single song that was in this musical, like, in one ear out the other, which is not a good thing because I normally get musicals stuck into my head, so the music was not memorable. The costumes were distractingly bad. As a person who spends a lot of time with historic dress and who isn't particularly a stickler on movie costumes, because I think there's an art to movie costumes that doesn't necessarily represent historical accuracy, which is totally fine. These were distracting to me. There were belt loops. And with theater, you can get away with a lot more because there's 20 feet between you and the audience. And so if I was sitting in the back, I wouldn't have been distracted. But because I'm up close with the camera, I'm distracted. But also just like, I don't know, it's just okay. It was eh. If the music was a lot better, I'd probably put it higher on this list. But if you like musicals and you like Pride and Prejudice and you have Amazon Prime, like, put it on. It's fine. It's just, everything intolerable, I suppose. It's like, it's not bad. It's just, I didn't particularly enjoy watching it. Same with this movie. This is Pride, Prejudice, and Atlanta. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice with an all-black cast, and it's also going into tolerable, I suppose. The thing about this film is that it was obviously not made for me. I'm as white as a sheet of printer paper. You can obviously see this. The sun hates me and it will burn me instantly. There are aspects of this movie that might be lost on me because of that, because I'm not in that culture. I don't want to... This movie, okay. So I feel like its really only contribution and its really only innovation on the story of Pride and Prejudice is that it had an all-black cast. So if that's something you want to see, and you want to see, Pride and Prejudice with an all-black cast, like, this is a fine movie. It's okay, it's fine. Again, it's of a TV movie quality. It didn't quite innovate enough on the story for me to be super interested. However, with that being said, it does tell Pride and Prejudice in a very authentic and true to the book sort of way. So I don't have anything bad to say about its plot structure in terms of Pride and Prejudice. The one thing I do have to say is they make Wickham good, and I'm just like, I feel like that diminishes the dramatic tension of the story of Pride and Prejudice. Additionally, it has a double wedding, and we know how I feel about that. So let's talk about Pride and Prejudice 1980. So this was a 5-part TV series that premiered on BBC in the 1980s, and it's going into tolerable, I suppose. This is one where it's a straight retelling of Pride and Prejudice, so there's really not much to say about the plot structure. It's Pride and Prejudice. It follows Pride and Prejudice. The thing that I didn't like about this movie was, one, I felt the dynamics between the characters were just sour. I really like when the characters of Pride and Prejudice have this more congenial, sort of tongue-in-cheek relationship, especially Mrs. Bennet. I like how it's a little bit more like, she's crazy, but we love her kind of situation going on. This movie, Mrs. Bennet, legitimately disliked Lizzie, and Mr. Bennet legitimately dislikes Mrs. Bennet. And when I was talking to my mom about this film, this was the first rendition of Pride and Prejudice that my mom watched. She watched it in high school when it came out, and she was like, I feel like it's really true to the book, because in the book, it's like, they really don't like each other. And I was like, yeah, but I just like that warm, fuzzy feeling, personally. Additionally, the costuming for this movie was, very late 70s Laura Ashley, which, that's not it for me. For that reason, I'm going to put it in tolerable, I suppose, because I'm never going to watch it again, and I don't want to watch it again, and to be honest, I didn't particularly enjoy it when I was watching it. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's really bad. I just don't particularly think it's good. So if you feel the need to be completionist and you really want to watch this version of Pride and Prejudice because you want to watch all the versions of Pride and Prejudice, go ahead. However, the 1995 version exists and that one's much better, so just watch that one. That's where I'm at with this one. Additionally, we have Death Comes to Pemberley, which is going in fine eyes. This is a sequel to Pride and Prejudice. It's the only sequel on this list. It's not a sequel to anything that exists. It's just a sequel. It's very confusing. It was a book that was written, obviously not by Jane Austen, and it was turned into this 3-part series. I really enjoyed this. It's a murder mystery, so it's not quite the satirical comedic fun that Pride and Prejudice is, but the relationships and the characterizations between the characters are really, really good. The only character that's sort of expanded on is, of course, Colonel Fitzwilliams, who doesn't really have a character in the original Pride and Prejudice other than plot driver. So I really enjoyed the relationship between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy specifically. I thought their relationship was really cute and I really liked it. And overall, it's just a fun watch. I would recommend it if you're a fan of Pride and Prejudice and you like sort of more murder mystery stuff. It's really good. 2 thumbs up for that. Now, here we are, folks. Here we are. We've got the last 2, and these 2 are the ones that are the most iconic. For that reason, they both get put into 10,000 a year. And I know. I like these both equally. I really do. And I feel like people have very strong opinions either way on whether the 1995 BBC miniseries or the 2005 movie is better. And to that I say, why not both? I love these movies both for different reasons, and I know that feels like a cop-out, but that is how I truly, truly feel. The 1995 version was the first version of Pride and Prejudice I ever saw. I watched it with my mother. I was like 11 years old, and I fell in love. I love that film, and it's such a good, true to form adaptation of the classic novel. It's got Colin Firth, who I think is the best Mr. Darcy, who is so good. He's Mr. Darcy twice on this list, frankly. And it takes Jane Austen's source material and it puts it to film in this very just beautiful way, in this way that makes sense, that is true to the novel, but also very, gives the film goer a little bit extra, gives us a little bit more into the psyche and mind of both Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth. The costuming is fine. It's good. I mean, it's very Regency. It's, they use like original lace. It's good. And, it's 90s BBC TV, so it's got that quality, but it's good enough for me, and I really enjoy this film. Pride and Prejudice 2005, on the other hand, is a blockbuster Hollywood film, so it's got absolutely gorgeous sets and absolutely gorgeous music. I mean, the music alone is so beautiful. And I love Keira Knightley as Elizabeth, and it's just such a romantic retelling of the story. It's the movie I go to when I'm sad or anxious. It's my comfort film, and it means a lot to me, specifically, just as the 1995 version means a lot to me in a nostalgic sense. And for that reason, I think they're both S tier, and I think they're both great, and I don't have anything bad to say about either of them. They both have their place, I think, in this canon of films. So I know that's probably not going to be the most popular opinions. I would add the 1995 version does have the double wedding, and we know how I feel about that, so that is a mark against it, but again, that's just me. That's the final list! Wow, I can't believe we got all the way through that. I can't believe I got all the way through that. It took me like a month to watch all of these. It was a lot of viewing, let me tell you. So if you would like to make your own tier list of all of these films, I will have the template up on tiermaker.com if you feel the need to do so. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Did I get this right? Did I get this wrong? What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? Tell me down below. Did I miss any? If I missed any, please tell me and I will do an update. Additionally, if you would like to follow me here on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and please like this video if you liked it. I normally don't do videos like this. I normally do videos about my study collection, about topics in historical dress I find interesting, and also a bit about my sewing adventures, but I might dip my toe back into this realm of period films because I do very much enjoy period films as well. It's called Costume and Conservation. We talk about costume and conservation here. So additionally, if you would like to follow me over on Instagram, that's where I talk about my sewing projects on a more regular basis. And you can also follow me on TikTok at Costume and Conservation, where I talk about my study collection objects as well as sort of my everyday happenings in this apartment. It's very active right now. I'm on bug duty. I found a carpet beetle on my person and that freaked me out. So let me tell you, there are pheromone traps throughout this 1-bedroom apartment right now. Otherwise, if you've gotten to the end here, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. See you later. Bye.